subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. So glad to be here with all of you on Friday night. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. Glad that you're all here. We're going to do our normal thing. The way these streams tend to work is that I give my opening remarks, which are then followed by the roll call, which is then followed by me answering your super chat questions until the end of the night. That's how it works. So if you have something you want me to talk about, or maybe, yeah, that one clicks a lot better, tell me. I will write it down in my lovely notepad, and then from there, I will answer it in the second half of the show. I'll pour some unnamed water beverage. Like I said, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, please. Post this on Reddit, post this everywhere videos are posted. Always good to have more people here. Post this on Facebook, Twitter, etc. Bring a crowd. So glad to be able to engage with all of you. Like I said, if there's any topic you want me to touch on in the second half of the show, just shoot me a super chat. I will do my best to give you an answer that will be helpful. Yeah, so that's how it's going to work. Anyhow, that's how it's going to work. So, yeah, I guess I'll just jump into my opening remarks. So, I actually thought that I would start out tonight. So, there was an article recently published. And it happened to be an article about some obscure left-wing stuff. And I, for one, am a person who has looked into quite a few obscure left-wing things. So I'm particularly interested. Okay. Writing it down. All right. I know quite a bit about obscure left-wing groups and such. And the article, Christian Parenti published this article. It was about the privilege walk, which is this exercise that they do at quote-unquote woke shops. That's what we're calling them. Sock Dems. There's workshops. Right? Look, if you've ever, unfortunately, in the United States, it seems like every communist group, every left-wing space is now dominated by people who go, if you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice, if you hear me clap 3 times, all right, now we're all going to sit in a circle and we're going to talk about our feelings, and we're going to talk about who's the most oppressed, and we're going to listen to each other while we're speaking. And we're not interested in ideology or class struggle or theory. Instead, we are going to, you and me, have an emotional conversation about privilege, right? We hate this stuff. We hate this crap. Well, Christian Parenti, the son of Michael Parenti, wrote a very good article exposing the origins of some of this. And if you've had an opportunity, and thank you, Tusker, for the super chat, if you've had the opportunity to look into Michael Parenti's Christian Parenti's article, it's pretty good. But there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more we can learn from it, right? I know a lot of the background, which I'd like to share with you, because there's a lot of information that's not in that article that is useful. I mean, I've been trying to piece this all together. I wrote a book called Bread Tube Serves Imperialism. I'm working on a book on the synthetic left. I wrote a book critiquing Kamala Harris, in which I drew from Sigmund Freud and the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And we're trying to figure all this out because the Marxist movement, the left in the United States and in the Western world, has just gone off the deep end. It's not Marxism. This isn't the politics of William Z. Foster. This isn't the politics of Gus Hall and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. This isn't the politics of the Black Panthers. Wokeism, the woke cult that hates average Americans, that is trying to give a makeover to imperialism, that hates socialist countries, that equates genuine leftists like myself and Jimmy Dore and Haas and Jackson Hinkle with neo-Nazis. This stuff is toxic, and we need to find out where it came from, right? Origins. We need to find out where it came from. So that's what I'm going to get into here tonight, because there's some important continuity here. There's some very important continuity. So in his article, Christian Parenti exposes that the first privilege walk. Now, this is a workshop. This is an exercise they do at these silly workshops, the woke shops, where, someone gets up and says, if you hear me clap once, you hear me clap 3 times, one of those workshops. One of the activities they do is you all line up and you take a walk, right? You take a step forward. If you've ever experienced this in your life, if you've ever experienced that in your life. And the idea is to kind of show who's the most oppressed, who has privilege. It's an exercise. They do it a lot of nonprofits do this, a lot of different groups do it. Where did it come from? Well, it came from the wife of Herbert Marcuse and Reevaluation Counseling. Woke politics is anti-communist and anti-working class. You're damn right it is, David, but we're getting to the roots of it. Where did it come from? Well, Christian Parenti showed that this exercise they do at woke shops, this privilege walk, was invented by two entities. First, it was invented by a woman who was married to Herbert Marcuse. Now, who was Herbert Marcuse? Herbert Marcuse was considered the ideological father of the New Left. He was a German he was actually an American academic. He worked for the U.S. State Department during World War II. He went into academia in Germany, and he was the father of the Frankfurt School. He wrote One-Dimensional Man. He argued that the proletariat and the working class would not make the revolution, but rather the intellectuals would. He argued that the Soviet Union was an authoritarian society in which the workers did not rule. He was a very prominent figure within the Frankfurt School, and he was a big influence. There was in the United States a development. There was a magazine called The New Left Review that promoted Herbert Marcuse's views, and Herbert Marcuse's ties to the American intelligence community are vast. I mean, he worked for the U.S. government. He was a U.S. State Department employee during World War II before he became the top Marxist academic in Germany with the Frankfurt School. So, he was just a straight-up U.S. government employee. Then we understand that part of the way his career advanced as an academic was that in Germany, there was a magazine called Der Monat that was set up by the CIA. Partisan Review and was in the United States. Encounter magazine was set up in the UK. And in Germany, the CIA-funded leftist and Marxist magazine was entitled Der Monat. And Der Monat published the writings of Herbert Marcuse. And they popularized him because Herbert Marcuse had an approach to Marxism that was about culture, it was about intellectuals and their alienation, it was about critiquing mass consumerism, and it wasn't about class struggle, and it wasn't about workers fighting back against capitalism and seizing the means of production, and it definitely wasn't supporting the Soviet Union. And this is the whole quote-unquote cultural Marxism thing that the right talks about. There's actual Marxism, which is about building. Okay, don't look up. There's actual Marxism, which is about building mass organizations of working people to fight for their rights. And then there is this weird academic intellectual movement that is about how society is way too conforming and mass opinion is molded through the ideology of the ruling class and Antonio Gramsci and the culture struggle and fascism is everywhere and the authoritarian personality and this is all stuff that the CIA has pushed as an alternative to genuine Marxism. So Herbert Marcuse, very prominent academic of this sphere of New Left, post-Marxism, anti-working class, alienation, culture struggle stuff. That school has direct ties to American intelligence. And it was the spouse of Herbert Marcuse, who was living in San Francisco in the 1970s. She got involved with something called Reevaluation Counseling. And what is Reevaluation Counseling? Now, this is even more interesting. Folks, Scientology. Do you know what Scientology is? The Church of Scientology. The Church of Scientology is a religion that started out as a weird kind of, mental health counseling practice. It started out as it was called Dianetics, and it was invented by a science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer, and he was also a U.S. naval intelligence officer. And during the Second World War and in the aftermath of the Second World War, he worked for U.S. naval intelligence. And he was also very much into psychoanalysis. He was a friend of, what is his name? William Alanson Wright. William Alanson White, who was a leading psychoanalyst in New York City. And he was in psychoanalytic circles. And it's pretty clear that L. Ron Hubbard, this science fiction writer, this U.S. naval intelligence officer, and this guy who hung out in the psychoanalysis circles of New York City, it's pretty clear he also worked with Wilhelm Reich. And Wilhelm Reich was an individual who fled Nazi Germany. And he was a psychoanalyst who was kicked out of psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud, and he was kicked out of the German Communist Party because he believed that Nazism was rooted in sexual repression. He wrote a whole book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism, arguing that the swastika is two naked bodies and that it sexually arouses people to look at it, arguing that everything about Nazism is somehow sexual in tone, and that the cause of Nazism is sexual repression. Right. All right. Vaccine mandates. The cause of Nazism was sexual repression. That all of these people, that were attracted to Hitler, they were sexually aroused by Hitler's speeches and by Nazism, and they were longing for a strong father figure or something. It was all about sex. And the German Communist Party said that's malarkey, and they kicked out Wilhelm Reich. And the Psychoanalytic Institute and Sigmund Freud said that's a bunch of malarkey, and they kicked out Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich had his own grouping. It was called Sex Pol. And it was a group of people, and in Germany they had gone around selling contraceptives and condoms and going door to door offering people pamphlets about sex, about homosexuality, and about contraception, and about, how to have better sex and stuff. It was this weird sex cult started by Wilhelm Reich. Well, Wilhelm Reich, the Nazis came to power, he fled Germany, and he moved to New York City. And he taught at the New School University. And he had this little cult of followers who he gave psychoanalytic treatment to. He was their therapist. And his belief was that all mental illness is rooted in sexual repression. All mental illness is rooted in sexual repression. By engaging in therapy with Wilhelm Reich, he would help cure you of your mental illness by helping you unleash your suppressed sexual desires, etc. Eventually, after World War II, Wilhelm Reich invented this magical machine that you were supposed to masturbate inside of. And it was the orgone machine, because he believed that when you orgasm, magical energy comes out of you. There's this magical energy called orgone that comes out of you when you orgasm, but then it just goes away. But inside of his magical box, if you got inside of his magical box and masturbated inside of it, then the magical energy would stay inside the box and your body would absorb it and you would just become so healthy. It was nutty. It was just absolutely nutty. But Wilhelm Reich, he had this whole little cult in New York City, and then they eventually moved to New England. It was like Maine or someplace. They set up a whole town called Orgone. Right? Ask the Workers' Party. Okay. I like Hinkle. He's a good guy, and I don't know what that's about. But anyway, so, so this magical energy, and, and it was bunk. And eventually Wilhelm Reich was charged for fraud. He was charged for fraud because it had no medical value. Albert Einstein there was a family member of somebody who was involved with this group, and so Albert Einstein was actually sent to inspect the orgone machine. And he said, this is bunk. It has no scientific value. And eventually, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, arrested Wilhelm Reich for medical fraud, and he was put in prison. And it was quite a scandal. And Wilhelm Reich was claiming that he could talk to space aliens. At one point, he claimed that there were space aliens who were sending him messages. He claimed that the Soviet Union, the communists, were trying to kill him, and they had infiltrated the American government, and that's why the American government was after him. It was a cult, basically, centered around Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich and his magical masturbation machine and his space aliens and his belief that Nazism was caused by sexual repression, etc. So, it was just this weird psychoanalytic cult that was started. It was a breakaway from psychoanalysis. Their primary thing is, psychoanalysis argued that much of the problems of society is rooted in sexual repression, but Wilhelm Reich said that all of society's problems are rooted in sexual repression. And that was Wilhelm Reich's teaching. And apparently, L. Ron Hubbard did encounter Wilhelm Reich. He did claim to be friends with a very prominent analyst in New York City called William Alanson White. And he was a U.S. Naval Intelligence officer, and he was also a science fiction writer. This was L. Ron Hubbard. This is the guy who started the Church of Scientology. Gabriel Rockhill. Okay, yeah, I'd be open to that. Yeah, sure. Congress for Cultural Freedom is important stuff. But anyhow, so L. Ron Hubbard started Dianetics, which was his own mental health treatment that he started in 1952. And Dianetics was basically a method that he had developed, that L. Ron Hubbard had developed, when working with people who had PTSD from the Second World War. He worked with veterans, people that are, veterans of the Second World War and had, the Second World War was just like any other war. It was horrendous. People died. People were blown up. It was a horrendous experience. You had a lot of people who came back to the United States with horrendous PTSD. And back then they didn't call it PTSD. They didn't call it PTSD. There was almost a shame, a stigma around it. They'd say they were shell-shocked. It was kind of a shameful thing to have. But this was, post-World War II. They started to have, there was interest in U.S. society, and what do we do with PTSD? L. Ron Hubbard was hanging out with psychoanalysts, and he was also tied in with U.S. naval intelligence, and he was well connected, and so he was involved in doing research on veterans with PTSD. And Dianetics or Scientology was developed as L. Ron Hubbard's quote-unquote treatment for people with PTSD, basically. And what it is you sit down with the person, and they hook you up to a magical machine that's got some, electrodes in it or something, and you sit down with them, and then you relive traumatic, painful experiences. Whatever your painful memory is, the person who is working with you, they call it auditing in Scientology, they draw you out of your comfort zone, and they force you to relive a painful experience. And it's very difficult, especially if the person has experienced real pain and trauma, right? I mean, if they were in a war and somebody got their arm and leg shot off, you have to replay it in your mind over and over again. And the person in some cases, starts breaking down and crying and having a huge emotional experience, right? And the person's instinct is to resist this. Is to resist this. You don't want to relive your painful experience, but the auditor forces you to relive it. And then after you've done it for a while, you start to have endorphins. You start to get an endorphin rush because it's just overwhelming for your system. You're reliving this painful experience over and over and over until finally you just start to get an endorphin rush in your mind because you just can't take it anymore. And so then the auditor says you're healing from your experience. You're healing. You're becoming healed. Right? This is this joy that you're starting to feel. You're starting to laugh. You're starting to feel released. This is you becoming cured of your painful experience, and so you're healed. And that's how Dianetics works. It's a hypnotic and trauma bonding manipulative mind trick, basically. And it's damaging to people because it re-traumatizes the person. It's not helping the person recover from the pain they've experienced. It's actually having the opposite effect. is that the person is reliving the painful experience they had, and it's flashing over them and over them and over them, and they're reliving it, and they're becoming re-traumatized by it. But then they get a big endorphin rush from it, and they walk out feeling relieved. And it starts to become an addiction, right? When the person feels particularly stressed out, they'll need to go and get audited, and then they'll sit there and relive their painful memory, and then they'll get the rush, and they'll think they're being cured. And so it becomes kind of an addiction, where the person, it becomes part of their life, is they have to go and experience this. This is what Dianetics is. And it is, you know, it's some hypnotic, trauma bonding, you know, psychoanalytic voodoo, basically. So that's what Dianetics is. Now, one of the people who helped found Dianetics with L. Ron Hubbard was a man named Harvey Jackins. Harvey Jackins was his name. And Harvey Jackins was a member of the Communist Party. He was a member of the Communist Party USA. In the 1930s, he was a leader of like dock workers unions and stuff, and he was a communist. And he got dragged before the House Un-American Activities Committee, you know, because he'd been a prominent leader of the Communist Party. And because of that, L. Ron Hubbard kicked him out of Dianetics because he was freaked out. Oh my God, there's a communist in my organization, right? L. Ron Hubbard was very anti-communist. He thought the communists were out to get him. So Harvey Jackins, who was a communist, and according to, there's a book by Tim Woolforth that alleges that Harvey Jackins was an anti-revisionist. He was like a hardliner. He liked Stalin. He didn't accept Khrushchev's secret speech. He liked Mao. Regardless, Harvey Jackins was kicked out of the Communist Party, and he was, you know, then he was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. L. Ron Hubbard freaked out and kicked him out of Dianetics, right? And eventually Dianetics, they got sued and they got put out of business, so they reformed as the Church of Scientology. So this guy is basically a founding father of Scientology. He was a close associate of L. Ron Hubbard when L. Ron Hubbard was first starting Scientology, and he learned this method, that basically what Scientology is, which is, it's this traumatic, I just described what it is, right? So he's kicked out of Dianetics. So L. Ron Hubbard started his own group that he called Reevaluation Counseling. I think at one point he called it co-counseling. He called it co-counseling at one point. And it was co-counseling, reevaluation counseling. He wrote a book called The Human Side of Human Beings. And it was all about how it's the same as Scientology. There's passages of it that many people argue are almost plagiarized from Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. The idea is you are haunted by your past, by your trauma, and through this talk therapy method where you sit down with the co-counselor, you sit down with them, and you relive your painful experiences, you know, you can start to cure and purge yourself of these painful memories, and it's the exact same thing. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Scientology sued co-counseling many times because they felt this was, you know, Scientology is copyrighted, and so they felt that they had been violated. So it's called co-counseling. And in the 1970s, co-counseling, interestingly, it was around. It was on the West Coast primarily. It was in San Francisco. It was in Los Angeles. It was in the Seattle, Washington State area. But reevaluation counseling, they were Maoists. They were out and out Maoists. Now, they didn't tell people that. The way they recruited is they would start support groups. They would have ads in the newspaper. Are you a former Roman Catholic who has had trouble since you've stopped being Catholic? Come to our support group. You know, were you in an abusive relationship? Come to our support group. Are you gay and just coming out? Come to our support group. What is this? Okay. I'll check Gabriel out. Thank you very much, Tusker. They would go to the support group and they would do the reevaluation counseling methods with you, and eventually you'd get drawn into reevaluation counseling. You'd try to recruit other people to reevaluation counseling. And after you'd been in it for a while, okay, I'll have to check that out. I didn't watch The Hill today. I'll check it out. Thank you. After you'd been in reevaluation counseling long enough, you would realize they were Maoist communists. They weren't just a therapy group. They were actually Maoist communists, and they, wanted to overthrow capitalism, and they studied Mao's Little Red Book and the teachings of Mao Zedong, And they were actually a communist group kind of posing as a therapy group. And that's reevaluation counseling. And it is reevaluation counseling that recruited Herbert Marcuse's spouse, Shriver Marcuse, recruited her, and together, reevaluation counseling and, Herbert Marcuse's spouse, they invented this privilege walk exercise. So it's very interesting. When we talk about wokeness, this privilege walk is a big part of wokeness. And if you look into it, it's very, very interesting that the roots of it are in L. Ron Hubbard, U.S. Naval Intelligence Officer, the spouse of Herbert Marcuse, somebody else whose work was pumped by the CIA, an academic who was promoted by the CIA. But it's more interesting than that. There's a lot more there. First of all, I got interested. This article by Christian Parenti just came out a couple weeks ago. But I've been reading about this stuff for a while. And so I got on the internet one day and I just decided to search for Harvey Jackins, right? And I wanted to find out about, this group and this communist split from Scientology. What was this all about? So I Googled Harvey Jackins. I found a speech by Harvey Jackins' son. The son of Harvey Jackins is now the head of Reevaluations Counseling. And he's the head of it. He inherited it from his dad, basically. He inherited the farm of Reevaluation Counseling. And I listened to a workshop or a speech by Harvey Jackins' son, who is now the leader of Reevaluation Counseling. And I listened to it, and I thought, for a Maoist group, there's nothing communist about this. It's all about how racism traumatizes everybody. And I listened. It was a long speech, and it was a well-delivered speech I listened to. It was like the only thing I could find by them on the web. But it was a speech about how racism traumatizes you. Racism is traumatic for the victims of racism. Racism is traumatic for people who are around racism. It's traumatic for the whole society. And through their teachings, they will cure you of the trauma of racism. That's basically what I listened to, and I thought that's not Marxism, right? Marxism is about class struggle. It's about economics. Marxism is opposed to racism and exposes racism as evil. But this is not Marxism. But this sounds an awful lot like everything I've been hearing at the woke shops, right? That's what it's all about. It's about traumatic experiences. It's about pain. There you go. London, office of the Church of Scientology is luxury, building in the city, money alone won't get you a building there. There's some serious connections. Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely sure. And I mean, L. Ron Hubbard was at one point a U.S. Naval Intelligence Officer. So, this grouping, right, reevaluation counseling, that is like the weird Maoist communist breakaway from Scientology, seems to be the roots of some of the wokeness. Some of the wokeness, is very, very much rooted in all of this. But then that brings me to, if you want to learn the history of CIA brainwashing, there's a very important book you can read called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate by John D. Marks, right? What method do you think Marxists should use to deal with victim? Well, all right. Writing that down, and personality cults. All right. John D. Marks was a journalist, and he wrote a book exposing the CIA's decades of research into brainwashing and mind control. And it's quite fascinating, right? Project MK Ultra was a CIA operation. And it started out because, it's really hilarious how this all started out. It started out with the fact that communists were so good at recruiting people, right? It was just the U.S. government couldn't understand why do so many people around the world believe in communism. It couldn't be that there's any arguments for it. It couldn't be that it raised the Soviet Union to be a superpower and defeated the Nazis. Go on Leah Remini and Mike Rinder's podcast. If they'll have me on, I would go on there. But it couldn't be that. Oh no, couldn't possibly be that. No. And during the Korean War, there were a number of GIs who were, U.S. soldiers who were captured. And they were captured, and in prisoner of war camps, they signed confessions to war crimes, and they converted to communism. there were a lot of U.S. soldiers who, in prisoner of war camps over the Korean border in China, converted to communism. And so the U.S. government freaked out about this, and they said, "Wow, this can't be happening. These are good American boys from Kansas and Idaho and places like that. They can't possibly be becoming communist." And they were convinced that the Chinese communists had some like magical, it was racist, some magical Asian voodoo, right? The Chinese communists, they have some magical like hypnosis, mind control thing they're doing to our good American soldier boys and brainwashing them to become communists. And so the CIA and John Foster Dulles, and they got obsessed with mind control and brainwashing. And so did British intelligence. Among British intelligence, you had a very, very evil man named William Sargent. You can Google this guy, William Sargent. William Sargent was a mental health professional who worked for the British intelligence agencies. And he was obsessed with trying to figure out mind control and brainwashing. He published 2 best-selling books. One was called The Battle for the Mind. Another was called The Mind Possessed. But he killed people in his research. I mean, you can read about it. That he, one thing he did is he tried to figure out if you could brainwash people, okay, worker. If you could brainwash people, in their sleep. And so he kept people in a deep sleep state, and he would just drug them because they were asleep for months, right? And every time they would wake up, they'd give them more drugs, and they would just be asleep for months while he like played music and talked to them as they were sleeping, trying to brainwash them with their sleep. And he killed people. There were people who never woke up from the deep sleep that they were kept in for months and months. I mean, you read about William Sargent. This man was a very evil. This guy was like something out of a horror movie. He was like, he ran mental hospitals and like mental patients. And you can listen, there's BBC radio interviews with survivors of his demented experiments. There was a woman who, I guess she was a teenager. She had some mental health problems. She ended up in a British mental health facility. And then she was injected with chemicals and kept asleep for like a year, while he did weird experiments to try and figure out how to brainwash her. William Sargent. And you read about the Tavistock Institute, and that there was this whole effort by British intelligence, by American intelligence, to try and control people's minds. And different methods were developed for doing it. There were different ways of trying to control people. And a lot of what you see in the woke shops, is stuff that comes right out of these CIA manuals. One of the main things, this is the biggest sign, this is one of the biggest alarm bells of CIA mind control that I've ever seen. Infantilization. All right? If you're building a real political movement, if you're serious about trying to empower people, to overthrow capitalism, trying to get working people to come together and fight for their rights, you want to make them strong. You want to make them proud. You want to affirm people's dignity. What is it, in Mao's very famous essay about the report on the investigation to the Hunan province? He wrote, those who are downtrodden in the dirt have now audaciously lifted up their heads, and in doing so, they are leading all of China to do so. I mean, this is the whole point. The whole point of communism is to lift people up. To make them aware of their own strength, right? That's almost a cliche, right? That Marx made the proletariat aware of their own strength. It's about empowering people that have felt like they're not important, people who have felt like they're not valued, people who have felt like they don't have the agency over their own life, like someone else is in control of them, people who've been forced to just bow before their boss and bow before the police and bow before society are being lifted up, right? I always quote that Eugene Debs speech where he says, look at yourself in the mirror and see a man. Now, obviously, we'd say see a person because that's sexist, but, it's about empowerment. It's about learning to be strong. That's what Marxism has always taught people to do, to let the working class stand strong. But CIA brainwashing and woke shops, they do the opposite of that. CIA brainwashing and woke shops make people children. They infantilize people. That's really what these woke shops do. If you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice, if you hear me clap 3 times, I am going to talk to you like I'm a kindergarten teacher who is talking to a class of 6-year-olds. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have to pick up our crayons before we put them in the toy box. This is what they're doing. If you go to any of these woke shops, it's all about infantilizing people, making people who are full-on adults act like children. It is a maniacal thing. But what is that about? We all had a childhood, right? I mean, might have been a good one, might have been a bad one. We all had a childhood, and it's about regressing you. It's about regressing you psychologically to childhood. When you're a child, the adults are in charge. The teacher's in charge, your parents are in charge, and a child is a child. Their mind is still growing. They're not making their own decisions, and in a lot of cases, they're not thinking critically because they have to kind of rely on the adults to lead them. Beverly Dangelo? You mean Robin Dangelo? I don't know who Beverly Dangelo is, but it's about regressing you to a childhood state so that you will be more comfortable letting other people lead you and make decisions for you. All right? So that's a big part of it. It's about taking you out of your adult self and helping you to kind of regress to your childhood age so they can control you. Right? So that's part of it. And another part of it is that it's about reducing your ability to rationally reason and kind of bringing out your emotions. Children are very emotional. They throw temper tantrums, they laugh really loud, they cry, right? And we learn as we become adults. We learn to kind of control our emotions, right? And we learn to, you might be feeling bad, but you hold your head up high and you continue it. Or, you might be ready to explode with joy, but you keep your composure. But the woke shops are about kind of overwhelming you with emotion. It's about trying to overwhelm you with so much emotion that your ability to think critically is suppressed. And so in order to do that, they have to infantilize you. They have to reduce you, to a childlike state so they can control you. And so that you can then become overwhelmed by your emotions. Ultimately, what they're trying to do at the woke shops, and that's why it's all about trauma, and that's why it's all about reliving pain. That's a big part of the woke shops, is getting up and crying and talking about the hard thing that happened to you, and bonding with people over trauma. It's co-counseling, reevaluation counseling, Scientology. It's infantilization, and it's disempowering you. Ultimately, the goal of the woke shops is to make you an obedient foot soldier, right? It's about that, they're trying to change U.S. society, to stabilize it amid a capitalist crisis, and there are all these working people who just won't accept that and are demanding higher wages and better conditions, and are not understanding that Gaddafi is a dictator and America is bringing freedom, and Gaddafi is like oppressing women, okay? And so Barack Obama is bombing Libya to protect the women. Are you going to silence those women of Libya that are being oppressed by Gaddafi? Even though Gaddafi had like the best conditions for women of like any Middle Eastern country. I mean, women in the military, whole women's sections of the military, women elected in local government. I mean, read what the Green Book says about women. I mean, it's empowering women. And I mean, compared to, Saudi Arabia that the USA supports, it's ridiculous. But it's all about kind of this emotional thing and this loaded emotional thought stopping. And that's a really big part of it also. If you think certain words, you have to turn your brain off, right? And that's another part of CIA brainwashing, right? If if somebody, I've seen this, all these bread tubers who criticize my books, they don't criticize anything I say. They read through it and they're like, he said Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is an alt-right word. Must stop thinking. Oh, what? He said he criticized AOC. Criticizing AOC is what Fox News does. Must stop thinking. And they just do this. They have this like phobia of exploring certain ideas. They develop a block or a phobia or a thought-stopping engagement in their mind. It's right. Basically it's about, getting people to think. Now, there are certain things that are really scary. One of those is class reductionism. If someone's a class reductionist, they're bad. So you should be very scared. And it's about kind of scaring people out of having certain thoughts, training people to police their own thoughts, right? To police their own thoughts, reducing them to an infantile state and allowing their emotions to overcome them. And that's what they do at woke shops, right? That's what they do. Now, obviously, the woke shops, and I've been to these woke shops, and they're toxic, but, they develop in different ways. They develop in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, they weren't all invented by co-counseling. Privilege walk is just one activity they do at woke shops. There are many different versions just of that one activity, okay? But this is where wokeism comes from. That wokeism is about, it is a form of mind control. It is a form of brainwashing. And it is something that seems to have its roots in some institutions like the Church of Scientology, like Reevaluation Counseling, like the Frankfurt School, like, the Schreiber Marcuse, right, that have some roots with the intelligence apparatus. But ultimately, if any organization comes to you and starts trying to make you act like a child, thoughts on the 2019 DSA convention, that seemed pretty infantilizing, didn't it? If any institution is coming to you and trying to infantilize you, and trying to disempower you, and trying to tell you not to engage intellectually, and instead, trying to make you feel like you're 3 years old or 6 years old, and instead trying to make this just emotional environment where everyone just shares their emotions and cries about bad things that happens to them, run, because that's brainwashing. That is CIA brainwashing. Okay, if you're in a serious Marxist organization, they are going to empower you. They are going to push you to do things you were never even believed you were capable of doing. They're going to encourage you to think more deeply. They're going to teach you genuine Marxist concepts, and they are going to make you more proud of who you are. They're going to make you stand taller than before. They're going to make you feel like you're more of an adult than you were before. Not like a child, but like more of an adult. They're going to lift you up. They're going to empower you. They're going to make you feel more responsible, more mature, more strong. They're going to encourage you to read books by Marx and engage with these ideas in a way you've never engaged with them before. They're going to enhance your intellectual understanding. And while there may be some emotional speeches here and there, the point is to get you to think deeper, and the point of the emotion is to give you more passion with which to do your work and to arouse the consciousness of the proletariat. And that should be the goal, right? And that what you see in woke shops, I hated these woke shops. I was in a communist group that at the beginning of the time I was in it seemed like a communist group. And after a while, all of our meetings turned into woke shops, right? And they recruited some people that were running NGOs in North Carolina, and we would have these things where instead of raising our hands, they threw the bouncy ball. They threw the bouncy ball. Catch the bouncy ball. And, let's make a list of some of the fears we have about our upcoming rally. And let's make a list of some of the hopes we have about our upcoming rally. Let's share some experiences. And I just hated that shit. I hated it so much. I really, really, really hated it. One of the worst things is that, they had a series of classes one time. And it was, one of the classes was supposed to be on the history of the Marxist movement. It was supposed to be on the history of the Marxist movement. But they decided that they couldn't talk about any other socialist group in a negative way. So they couldn't talk about the difference between anarchism and Marxism. They couldn't talk about the difference between Trotskyism and Marxism-Leninism, because that would be mean. We don't want to be mean to other people. We can't, study the history of this ideology or anything. So what they did is they printed out, I kid you not, the first paragraph of the fucking Wikipedia pages of all these groups. And one by one, we all read, the Revolutionary Communist Party was founded in 1975, and it was created by Bob Avakian. And then we all clapped for the person who read the fucking Wikipedia page. I'm sitting there as somebody who's studying the history of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster, knows in depth and is engaging with Marxism and all of this. And the Socialist Workers' Party was established in 1939, and yay! I mean, it was the most infantilizing thing I'd ever seen. And then one of these woke creeps got up and he said, all right, let's talk about some of the things that anarchists say about communists. And then he wrote a bunch of words. And then he said, now let's talk about some of the things that communists say about anarchists. And then he wrote a bunch of words. And that was it. And I'm like, what is this, Truth and Reconciliation? I was sitting there, I'm like, there's this whole ideology from the First International to the Second International, the Third International, Gus Hall, William Z. Foster. I mean, and I'm sitting there, Stalin, and I mean, there's like all these ideas that are really fucking important. And we're reading the Wikipedia pages. You know, the Communist Party was established in 1919 and is now headquartered in Manhattan. And then we all had to applaud. Yay! You know, and if I didn't applaud, they looked at you, Caleb, why are you not applauding? They did a really good job. Johnny did a really good job reading the paragraph on his note card. Why are you not applauding Johnny? You know, I mean, it was just like, I was sitting there and it's like, this is the ideology I've given my life to. This is what I'm dedicated to studying. And they reduce it to this woke shit because at the end of the day, these people didn't believe in communism. They believed in something closer to anarchism or something closer to what we now call rad libs. And so the idea of having a class where you would actually engage this stuff scared them because they didn't believe in this stuff. They believed in wokeism. Right? And these people, they all worked at NGOs. They worked at liberal NGOs. You know, one of them worked at an NGO in New York City and was a consultant for NGOs and eventually just sold out Marxism. The other one was in North Carolina, was running a bunch of NGOs for them. Again, didn't believe in Marxism. And this communist group was just, oh, okay, you know how to give classes. You run an NGO. You can be in charge. And it was so bizarre. And then it was weird. These people who don't believe in your ideology, who don't believe in what the organization is supposed to stand for, don't believe in the principles of the group, they get to just do whatever they want. But anytime I wanted to do anything about, you know, Marx or Lenin or whatever, they would hold me off because it was like a threat somehow. Well, you know, you think you know more about it than us. Or it was weird. So these people who didn't believe in communism were given complete free rein to put on woke shops. And you know, me, who actually did believe in communism, was constantly being suppressed. Anything I did was immediately criticized, and it was like somehow disrespecting the leaders that I would do it. And this is what's going on. It was very similar to my experience in the 90s in the CPUSA. They were beginning to talk about intersectionality and how William Z. Foster was a racist. Unbelievable. Yeah, but this is this woke stuff. Right? This is where it comes from, right? I mean, we're learning the roots of it from Christian Parenti. I've done research. We're talking about CIA brainwashing. You know, we're talking about Scientology and Dianetics and Harvey Jackins. We're talking about Wilhelm Reich. And that all of this stuff, you know, wokeism is a big mess. It is a big mess. And most of it comes from the CIA. Most of it comes from the fact that they determined... It's kind of like in Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. If you ever read Mein Kampf by Hitler, right? Mein Kampf is by Adolf Hitler, and Hitler is raging against communism. Hitler hated Marxism. He hated Marxism. He hated communism. And in Mein Kampf, Hitler is ranting about how the German Kaiser was never able to defeat the Marxists. He was never able to defeat the Marxists because the opposition to Marxism was always the status quo. So in order to defeat Marxism, Adolf Hitler writes, it's necessary to form a new revolutionary movement that will capture that energy and that fervor and use it to crush the communists. And that is what wokeism is. I mean, and that's what fascism originally was, right? It was counter gangs and stuff. And that's what synthetic leftism is, and that's what a lot of different things are. But wokeism is an attempt to build some kind of mobilization of society to crush Marxism, to beat back the right wing and control the right wing and stabilize, you know, this capitalist society on the one hand, and on the other hand, to beat back legit and genuine Marxists, right? And that's why they've gone so viciously after Jimmy Dore. That's why they've gone after Haas and Jackson Hinkle and myself. It's, you know, that they realize that you can't just defeat Marxism on the basis of defending the status quo. You need to build some kind of other movement that captures people's emotions, captures people's energy, and directs them in a different way. And that's what's happening. And, you know, there's Bonapartism. There are factions in the ruling class battling against each other, but trying to mobilize workers to be their foot soldiers. And this is where wokeism comes from. And I've spent a long time studying this. I wrote about this in BreadTube Serves Imperialism. I wrote about this in my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. I'm working on a much longer book that's much more well-researched on this topic. But we need to de-wokify the left. We need to de-wokify the left. We need to build a non-woke left. And that is what the Center for Political Innovation aims to do. We want to restore leftism, to purge the menace of wokeism, to purge it from leftist circles and build a left that is not woke, that is genuinely anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist, that empowers people, that makes them feel stronger and more proud of who they are, that makes people smarter, not stupider, that makes people go out and engage in heroism, right? Heroism, right? That is a basic inner drive that human beings have, right? You know, every year they come out with more superhero movies. Why do people love superhero movies? Because deep inside of us, every human being has a drive to become heroic. We want to go out and make great sacrifices for the cause of right. We want to go and triumph over injustice. The reason people love Superman and Batman and Spider-Man is because they want to be that. All of us want to be heroic. And the great thing about Marxism is a vehicle through which people can become heroic. It enables working people to become heroic. That's what Marxism offers you. If you want to be a hero, you should be a Marxist, because Marxism is a science about empowering we the people to take history into our own hands, to take up history's challenge, and to stand up and fight back and resist. And if you read Mao Zedong's writings, read the writings of Vladimir Lenin, where he says the masses, revolutions are a festival of the oppressed. At such times, they are capable of performing miracles, right? This is about, Marxism is the vehicle through which people can become heroic. And if you look throughout history, it's not, long before Marxism, there were heroes. There were people like Joan of Arc. There were people like Jesus Christ. There were people like Spartacus. There were people who sacrificed, laid down their life for the cause of right, and were heroic, right? And you talk about in Shia Islam, martyrdom. The martyr is the most holy person one can be, as a martyr, one who gives their life for the faith, right? The Black Panthers, I believe that they used to chant at their rallies, live for the people, die for the people, live for the people, die for the people. This is what Marxism is. If you're wondering why people become communists, the CIA could never figure this out, right? It's like, there must be some Chinese voodoo or something. No, there is a drive in human beings to become heroic. Every person wants to be a hero at the end of the day. For a lot of people, when you're a child, your hero is your parents. And that, in some cases, that can be heartbreaking because people have shitty parents. But in other cases, that's a good thing. And that's why a lot of people want to have children, is they want to emulate the heroism they observed in their parent, right? Human beings have an innate drive to become heroic. And Marxism is a vehicle through which people can become heroic. And that's what it can offer. And what woke shops are about are trying to reduce you to an infantile state of mind, where you're the opposite, where you're the subject, not the object, where you are being manipulated and someone else is thinking for you, and your emotions are allowed to overtake you. And my goal with my efforts and my organization and my streams, I want to find the hero inside of you. I want you to become heroic. I want to empower you to become heroic. I want you to be able to go out and do things you did not believe you were capable of doing. I want you to make a great sacrifice and a great achievement for the proletariat. I want you to make a great breakthrough in the class struggle. I want you to become heroic, right? I see a potential hero in all of you now, and that is my goal, right? And I'm not trying to disempower you, and I'm not trying to make you feel like you're 3 years old, and I'm not trying to shame you. I'm trying to make you heroic. And by disseminating these ideas and these concepts, that is what I'm trying to achieve. So if you want to continue to work with me, I will try my best to bring out the heroism of the working class, to make the proletariat aware of their own strength, and ultimately get beyond the system that puts profits before people, and unleash humanity to its full potential, to overcome scarcity and get to a society where there's so much abundance and so much prosperity that there's no need even for a state, right? We want to get to a world with so much wealth and so much abundance that we can live by, to each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs. That is the goal of Marxism, right? Is to get beyond the society of scarcity, to let human beings continue to invent and create. And it is really the most optimistic ideology in history. That's what it is. And I want to pass that ideology on to you. And so that's what I'm doing. So those are my opening remarks about CIA brainwashing and woke shops and all that stuff. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do the roll call. And after the roll call, then I'll start answering your super chat questions. So roll call, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Maxim is in Vladivostok. Wow, you're pretty far east there, Maxim. Maxim's in Vladivostok. Montreal, Chaya, good friend of the program. Kieran from San Diego. Rees from Adelaide, Australia. Very, very good. Arturo from Alaska. Florida. Arizona, Springfield, Missouri, Clydebank, New Jersey, Las Vegas, Micah, Joey from Belize, Prince George, British Columbia, Canada, Wisconsin, Colorado, Ben in Suffolk County, Ricky Rosso in Texas. Shout out to you, Ricky Rosso, good friend of the program. Calamont, Michigan, Diego from Southern California. There was, what is it? I think there was a chant, SoCal, SoCal, so red, so red. Utah, North Carolina, Alaska, Binghamton, New York, Bob Troy in New York, Kendall in San Diego, Joseph from Baltimore, Char Darling is in San Angelo, Texas, David in China, JT24 in Mississippi, Tristan in Maryland, shout out to you, Tristan, St. Louis, Ryan in Oakland, shout out to you, Ryan, Joshua Tree, Kinky, good friend of the program, and Joshua Tree, Edmonton, Nathaniel in Washington, Las Vegas, Johnny in Washington, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio, Albuquerque, New York, Norway, Danny from Illinois, North Carolina, Cincinnati, Ohio, West Virginia, Brazil, Winnipeg, Washington, Cedar Park, Texas, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Montreal, Arizona, Phoenix, Sean, Planet Mars, Andy, New Zealand, Moscow, Vinicius from Brazil, David in Bendigo, Australia, good friend of the program, shout out to you, David, Herb Bryant in Florida, shout out to you, Herb Bryant, longtime friend here, Denver, Colorado, Nate from Sydney, Australia, New Yorker, Windy City, Gabby Hernandez, shout out to you, Gabby, good friend of the program, out there in Chicago, right? Connecticut, San Francisco, Io Hillary in New York, shout out to you. Metaverse, all right. Tasmania, someone's from Tasmania, right? That's an island, right? Jonathan from Arkansas. Jonathan from Arkansas. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. Anybody else want me to give their name and location? Anybody else? Names and locations? If not, we can start answering. Lancaster, England. Very good. Alrighty. Shortages due to COVID. What's going on? Well, it's quite simple. For a long time, when things were locked down and businesses were closed, people were not putting in orders for items that they had. Stores were not open. Any chance to upload these chats to Spotify? Well, actually, my good friend Edward has been doing that. I think lately he hasn't been doing it as much, but if you go to the Center for Political Innovation website, under podcast, they have a number of these streams that are on podcast, and he's been ripping them and putting them on Spotify and elsewhere. You can see the link on there, but for whatever reason, that's slowed down, but hopefully it resumes again soon. But yeah, if, for a long time, stores and businesses have been closed. Furthermore, because the demand has slowed down, there's not as many truck drivers on the road and there's not as many shipments. And so all of this has led to a situation where things are backed up. It's that simple, right? That production slowed down, demand slowed down, businesses closed down, deliveries stopped. And so now everything's backed up. And because things are backed up, we don't have the supplies that we once had. It's so funny. Isn't capitalism supposed to be so efficiently organized? I mean, you couldn't have a state-run economy. No. I mean, capitalism is just so efficient. It's just so efficient. Well, maybe not. Do you consider social democrats to be pessimistic? Classical, genuine social democracy is not pessimistic. Classical, genuine social democracy is just kind of a watered-down version of Marxism, right? Marxism, there are three schools of anti-capitalist thought. Social democracy is this belief that capitalism just kind of naturally turns into socialism. Marxism believes there is a struggle to seize political power and seize control of the state and utilize the state to build a planned economy. And anarchism is the belief that socialism will come about on a voluntary basis, without central authority, and it will be done voluntarily. And social democracy, classical social democracy, is optimistic. It argues that, yes, we can get to a society where working people are empowered. Yes, we're going to eventually get to a stateless, classless world. They just don't believe it's a struggle to seize political power. Edward Bernstein, who was he was the father of what he called evolutionary socialism or revisionist Marxism. Edward Bernstein said, "The movement is everything, the goal is nothing." And the idea is that unlike the Marxists and the revolutionaries that want to seize power and create socialism, the idea is one day we'll have free healthcare, the next day we'll have better union protections, and one day it'll all kind of eventually add up to socialism. That socialism is just the sum of reforms, right? The movement is everything. The goal is nothing, right? There was a friend of mine who was watching a hockey game, and he wrote, he made a Facebook status, "Goal!" He was so excited. So someone wrote below it, "Take that, Edward Bernstein." Because that is kind of the essence of social democracy. And social democracy is pro-imperialist. It thinks the West is the most advanced on the road to socialism. The West is the best. It's the most advanced. And in the West, we've already got universal public education and stuff like that. So we're almost to socialism already. That's social democracy. Classical social democracy is the idea that through parliamentary reforms, we'll gradually one day get to socialism. That's not pessimistic. That is optimistic. It's wrong, though, right? It is a struggle to seize political power. Imperialism is not progressive. It's holding back development. And, when countries around the world break free from imperialism, that's a good thing. And that in some cases, social democracy manages imperialism and makes imperialism more effective. It's not simply a matter of victories for the working class. It's a matter of stabilizing imperialism to make it function. So no, social democracy is incorrect. All right, socialism for the rich, quotes, all right. But that's not pessimistic, I wouldn't say. And that's why BreadTube is more dangerous, because BreadTube is pessimistic in their world outlook. And the synthetic left is pessimistic, whereas social democracy is just kind of a watered-down, non-revolutionary version of Marxism that is not inherently pessimistic, is somewhat optimistic. They tend to, social democrats are notorious for holding back revolutionary struggles. When the workers are on the brink of revolting, the social democrats say, "Calm down, guys, calm down." That's what they're notorious for, is kind of, pouring cold water on it. But at the end of the day, their outlook is still optimistic. Origins of hostility between NATO and Russia. Well, NATO was formed to oppose the Soviet Union. I mean, the Atlantic Pact was formed after the Second World War as an anti-Soviet pact. I mean, it was the whole reason that NATO exists is to oppose Marxism, right? Because after World War II, everyone knew the communists were the great anti-fascists. Eastern Europe was liberated by communists. In France, communists were elected to the government. In Italy, the Italian Communist Party was very popular. And there was a fear on the part of the United States that Marxism would expand into Western Europe. And the NATO, the Atlantic Pact, was this defense treaty, so-called, that was signed as a way of countering Russia, countering the rise of Russia. And it was Britain and the United States, the Atlanticist countries. And one definition of the word Atlanticist is a defender of NATO. That's how much. The Atlantic Council, it's called, is one of the main think tanks associated with NATO. NATO was formed to beat back Russia's influence. Now, that was back when Russia was the Soviet Union. But NATO is an anti-Russian coalition. That's what it is. That is what it is. So there you go. So you're asking about the origins of it. The whole reason NATO was formed was to stop the forces in Western Europe that were aligning with Russia, and to basically prevent, if Germany or if West Germany were to have a communist government elected, the capitalists would immediately invade, and NATO would crush it, right? And if Italy were to have a communist government, that would, it was formed. It was a military alliance to prevent communism from expanding into Western Europe. So, I mean, you're asking me the origins. It's not like they have a rivalry. It's not like, years ago they worked at the same store and one of them got fired and the other didn't. No, it's not. It's not like a group of friends, right? They've got a history. NATO and Russia, they used to be best pals, but then, NATO stole Russia's girlfriend, and it's not like that at all. I mean, it's not some like, historical grudge or something. It's an anti-Soviet pact. I mean, that's what it is. So there you go. All right. All right. The movie Don't Look Up. It held my attention, I must say. I laughed a lot while I was watching it, but it kind of sits with you as kind of a, I mean, it's a pessimistic film. It kind of argues that human beings are the problem, and happening in Ukraine, right? Human being, human beings are the problem, and that there's nothing that can be done. Americans are stupid. Our system is too like gummed up. It was an analogy for climate change. The premise of the movie is that an asteroid is going to hit the Earth. The scientists have discovered it, and the government and the media are too stupid to do anything about it, basically. And they made a woman president who's played by Meryl Streep. So at the beginning, it looked like they were trying to be a little bit balanced, and there is a villain who is a Silicon Valley figure. So I thought maybe that it was, somehow gonna try to be a little bit better, but it was just an analogy for climate change. The message of the film is the great scientists have discovered climate change is coming, but the stupid Americans, we won't get poorer. And towards the end, it's an attack on optimism. All right, towards the end of the film, it's a straight up attack on optimism. I mean, it's clearly an analogy for Trump. It's more of an attack on Trump than anything, right? But it's more of an attack on like the stupidity of Trumpism, right, and the kind of know nothingism of Trumpism. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of sickening. It leaves you with a sick taste in your stomach. It's human beings are the problem, and we're too greedy and we're not going to be able to handle, and it's like they made a number of movies. Like when I was a kid, they made like, what was it, a movie Armageddon and Deep Impact were the two movies that came out like at the same time that were about a meteorite going to hit the Earth, right? And then I didn't see either of them. But then they made a movie with Steve Carell that was like a comedy about a meteorite hitting the Earth. I can't remember what that movie was called. And now they made yet another comedy. This seems to be apocalyptic scenarios are pretty big. Can I ask what you think of the Atlantic Council crafting and meddling in domestic affairs? Oh, sure. We can talk about the Atlantic Council. So there we go. So there you go. It just left a bad taste in your stomach. Vaccine mandates. I'm opposed. I am for the vaccine. I am vaccinated. The vaccine is not fake. I'm not opposed to people getting vaccinated. You should go and get vaccinated. But, some people just don't. And I feel like the vaccine mandates, there's an element of kind of anti-working class, and, it's scapegoating the non-vaccinated, and I don't appreciate that. I see libertarians as dangerous political foes, yet U.S. leftists want to ally with them on interventionism. All right, we'll talk about libertarians. We'll talk about that because there's a lot there. Libertarians, foes, allies. All right. Vaccine mandates, I'm opposed. All right, methods of dealing with trauma. Look, at the end of the day, dealing with trauma is a matter of science, right? I mean, they do research on this all the time. And that if you should see a mental health professional. I am not a mental health professional. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a mental health professional. But you should see a mental health professional who's actually licensed and is using science. That's ultimately what you should do, right? If you're trying to deal with your trauma. But the other thing is you need to make some friends. A lot of traumatized people, they have such a hard time with relationships because, whatever happened to them, it's very hard for them to trust other people. They get easily hurt. But the more friends that you have and the more you can develop a real bond with other people, the more you can heal, right? The more you can have positive experiences with people. And the more you can notice patterns and how you think, right? And notice yourself making the same mistakes over and over. At the end of the day, you need to work with a mental health professional. But that said, one thing that I will say, this is just kind of a rant I feel like going on. It's hard. It is hard to be friends with anybody. No matter what friend you have, they will let you down at some point in your life. You know that? It is hard to stay married. Why do you think people get divorced so much? It's hard to stay married because there are some times that your spouse just gets on your nerves. It's hard to stay in a relationship, and it's hard to be in a political organization. Did you know that? It is very hard to be in a political group, an activist group. It's hard. It's hard. But people do it because it's rewarding. It's rewarding. It gives them something. And in terms of politics, it gets something done, right? And I think one of the problems that I'm seeing, I've criticized BreadTube because why aren't they building an organization? That's a fair criticism. But I've noticed there's a lot of people that are politically much better than BreadTube, but they're also not building a political organization. And I think, look, I have spent my entire adult life in communist groups. I have. I joined the Workers' World Party when I was 19, and I was with them for 8 years after that. And then, there was Students and Youth for a New America, and now I'm doing the Center for Political Innovation. And I have been doing politics and Marxism, and I've been in organizations, and I've worked with people, and I've made mistakes, and I've learned from my mistakes, and I've tried to do things better. But if you don't have an organization, you don't really have anything. But in the age of social media, a lot of people think that this is just kind of entertainment. And that is. I'm glad you're watching this, and I'm glad you're entertained. I respect that. But at the end of the day, my goal is to build an organization. That is my goal. I want to build a think tank. I want to build an organization, the Center for Political Innovation. And that building an organization requires people to deal with things they don't like and deal with people that they don't get along with. And sometimes there's going to be stuff that happens that you don't approve of. Now, in some cases, the Leninist democratic centralism, means that you have to carry out all the decisions of the group. You have to repeat the party line, even if you don't agree with it and stuff. I'm not in a democratic centralist organization at this point. Center for Political Innovation does not practice democratic centralism. But at the same time, there is a real value to building an organization. And it can be very rewarding. And you're part of a community, and you're working with another group of people to achieve a goal. And it's a very rewarding feeling. But in order to do that, there's going to be times where you're going to feel mistreated. And there's going to be times where you're going to feel like your voice is not being heard. And there's going to be times you're going to feel like the group is not doing what you want it to do. And obviously that's not desirable, and obviously I would like to negate that as much as possible and have everyone in the group be happy and enthusiastic the whole time. But obviously, just like with any organization, there's going to be people that are frustrated. But at the end of the day, you have to decide, is it worth it? Is it worth it to endure some hardship and difficulties? And for me, I've always known this, right? And that was the thing. Before I joined the Workers' World Party, I was with another communist group that shall not be named. And I tolerated a lot of their stuff, and I didn't leave, and I didn't join the Workers' World Party until I found some other place to go. Because I wanted to be part of an organization. I knew that I can't do this alone, right? And I feel like the understanding, right? Fall of Yugoslavia. IMF. NATO. That a lot of folks have just not been part of an organization, right? They don't know what it's like, right? And it used to be working class people, and people all throughout society were part of organizations. They were part of churches. They were part of fraternal organizations. It used to be, apparently, back in the time of my grandparents, everyone had a lodge, right? They were in the Odd Fellows, or the Freemasons, or the Elks, or the Knights of Columbus, or the Loyal Order of the Moose, or the Eastern Star, It used to be everyone was part of a lodge. That used to be what people did. They were all part of a lodge, right? Not anymore, right? Those groups are pretty obscure. Freemasonry is, people don't do that anymore. People aren't part of the Elks. People aren't part of the Loyal Order of the Moose. Churches, right? Again, people aren't joining churches like they once did. I understand that a lot of the churches are peddling right wing nonsense that is not Christianity. So I can understand there's a lot of demoralization, a lot of homophobia and such. But, and the Catholic Church has been hit by those horrendous scandals. But it's a bigger problem. It's not just a crisis for Christianity. It's not just a crisis for fraternal organizations. That social media and the way our society is developing, we're becoming more and more atomized. We're becoming more and more atomized individuals. And as we become atomized individuals, we're much easier to control, right? If it's you're all by yourself, right? The ruling class can very easily control you. But it's in groups that people find power. When you're part of an organization, when you're working with a group of people, that means suddenly you're a force to be reckoned with. That's what unions, the labor movement, has just emphasized this. That's the mantra, solidarity forever, right? The labor movement has constantly emphasized this, right? If you're just an individual on the job, your boss is going to kick you around. But when all the workers come together and they form a union and they refuse to work until their needs are met, that's when they have power, right? What is that? I believe, there's one of the labor union songs, "Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, but singly none, singly none. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, singly none." That was an old union song. It's a dark song. It's not a lot of the labor songs are passionate and cheerful, but this one's a little bit darker, right? Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, but singly none, singly none. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, but singly none. And human beings are collective creatures by entity. We are inherently collective creatures. But being in an organization, just like being married, just like being in a friendship, just like being a member of any group, is not easy. You have to, in some cases, make sacrifices. And you have to sometimes tolerate things that you don't like. And sometimes you have to be friendly and shake hands with people that you don't like. And sometimes you have to be in the room with people that have offended you. And that's what, that's what real organization is about, right? You have to be able to do that. And one thing that's really important is you have to learn to start and try and see things from another person's perspective, right? You have to learn to think, okay, now I see it this way, but this person clearly disagrees with me. Why do they disagree with me? Why do they disagree with me? Why do they feel the way they feel? What is it? What is their perception of the situation? And how can I try to change the way they feel so that we can cooperate better? And these are skills that you're not going to get sitting on Facebook. And arguing with people on Facebook, you're not going to get these skills. Arguing with people on Twitter, back and forth, I'm smarter than you. No, you're smarter than me. You're not going to, social media doesn't help this, right? This is stuff that you learn by working with people, right? And it's very important. And, I want to build a community and organization. So there you go. All right. And then the next question is cult of personality. Well, obviously, sometimes cult of personality is sickening. There's cases, I don't want to name names, but there are some communist groups that are so much a cult of personality, it's sickening. And, one thing, for example, I have no interest in defending Stalin's personality, right? I don't know. Stalin could have been an asshole for all I know, right? I defend the fact that he raised millions of people out of poverty. He defeated the Nazis. He industrialized the Soviet Union. But Stalin, on a personal level, I don't know. He could have been a jerk. He was clearly an effective organizer and stuff. But Even if Stalin was not a nice guy, even if Stalin was just a prick, it doesn't matter because I'm not interested in defending his personality. I'm interested in defending the legacy of socialism, right? And that's one thing that people get too caught up in. The cult of personality, in one way, in some ways, it's, people get too caught up on this person was good, this person was bad, this person, and you're missing the point, right? And that it's kind of cult of personality in its most vulgar characterization, and its most vulgar characterization just becomes worship of an individual for being the individual, right? And they're missing the point, right? If you like Stalin because you think he looked really sexy and he was just such a sexy man, and you're missing the point, right? You're missing the point. Stalin wouldn't have liked you to like him for that reason, right? That the reason people liked Stalin was because they saw him as carrying out the policies of the Soviet Union, right? And that again, you know cult of personality is something human beings do. I mean, there's celebrities in every society. There's always been celebrities. There's been monarchs. There's been, I mean, it's like, so human beings tend to idealize other human beings, and there are psychological reasons for that. So cult of personality, to some degree or other, is always going to exist. But the question is it a vulgar cult of personality? Oh, Norman Finkelstein. Is it a vulgar cult of personality, or is it a cult of personality that is based on, okay, this person is offering real leadership and achievements, but at the end of the day, right? I urge people to blindly follow nothing, right? I say we should study the achievements of socialist countries around the world, but we should study all of them and blindly follow none of them, right? And that if we're going to develop socialism in the United States, it's not going to be a copy of another country's socialism. So, I mean, there is a liberal mindset that says think for yourself, and that is where most of the critiques of cult of personality are coming from. Have you ever noticed that all the people who think for themselves think exactly the same things? I mean, for years, I've been handing out leaflets. I can't take your leaflet. I think for myself. I watch both BBC and Fox. I think for myself. And I think exactly what everyone thinks about China. And I think exactly what everyone else thinks about Russia. But I'm free thinking. I think for myself. And it's this like liberal thing. Don't have a cult of personality. Think for yourself. But, they all follow. I mean, it's a silly, liberal formulation, right? In the West, everyone thinks for themselves. Everyone's a free thinker, blah, blah, blah. And it's very fake. It's very fake, and it's like they're so brainwashed, they don't know they're brainwashed. I mean, on some level, right? It's like, if you go to an anti-imperialist country, people will tell you the leader of our country is, Ayatollah Syed Khamenei, the supreme leader, and we follow him. But in the United States, everyone thinks for themselves. No, they all think for themselves. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? It's like people have, become so ideologically, what is the term, drowned, in liberal ideology, that they walk around thinking they have no ideology when they're espousing ideology. So, I mean, obviously the cult of personality, in many cases, it's very vulgar, right? It's just hero worship, and that's not good. But on the other hand, some of the attacks on cult of personality are coming from a liberal place. It's coming from this, I think for myself, I have my own ideas, no one tells me what to think, and that's why I think exactly what's the same as CNN. And I find that to be very obnoxious also. I'm really tired of people telling me they have their own ideas, they form their own opinions, and magically they just happen to think the same thing as BBC or CNN. I mean, it's so obnoxious, right? So, there's a balance in there somewhere. We are going to need heroes in society. We're going to need great writers and intellectuals and scientists, and we're going to need great political figures, and we're going to need great great actors and stuff. And there's going to be individuals who stand out, who other people look up to them, but the question is, why do they look up to them, and do they blindly follow them? And this is just something human societies have wrangled with. In ancient Rome, they used to believe that the emperor was a god. He was a man god, right? Well, I mean, we don't believe our celebrities nowadays are gods, so we've come a long way, I guess, but there you go. All right. A worker-peasant mobilization that's coming up in South Korea. I'm not aware of that. I haven't followed the latest developments in South Korea. Sounds very interesting. There you go. All right. Socialism for the rich. Well, this is something that, it's a talking point, and I believe it's Michael Harrington who originated it. Michael Harrington was one of the founders of Democratic Socialists of America. He was originally a Shachtmanite Trotskyite. He joined the Socialist Party, and eventually, when the Socialist Party collapsed, he formed Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, and eventually DSA. And he went around giving speeches, and one of the things he would begin his speeches with, he would say, "We already have socialism for the rich, now we need it for the poor." Well, the problem with that talking point is that socialism is not handouts, right? People who say that, they think socialism is the government giving people free stuff, right? So we already give free stuff to rich people. That's true. Tax breaks, government subsidies, bailouts, etc. Yep, we already give free stuff to rich people. And so why don't we give free stuff to working people? Why don't we give working people free college and free health care and, a guaranteed job? Okay. Well, the premise is correct, right? That it's not fair, right? But that's not what socialism is. Socialism is the economy functioning on the basis of central planning and not the irrationality of profits. It's overcoming profits in command and moving toward a society where the means of production operate in accordance with the needs of society. So it's not a correct definition of socialism, but the argument that they're making, which is that we give handouts to rich people who don't need it, and and anything that's given to working people is like, oh my God, it's like some evil, social welfare program. Yeah, there's a bias there. Look, New York City. Billionaires Row. There are 7 buildings in New York City that are like the most expensive places to live in the entire world. Billionaires Row, they're called, right? These are apartments that cost over $100 million each. Some of these buildings. And the city of New York has bent over backwards to give these people tax breaks, to people some health care. Oh my God, we're going to have communism. That's what they get. That's what they're getting to with their talking point about socialism for the rich. It's not a correct understanding of what socialism is, but what they're talking about is correct. All right, what's happening in Ukraine? What's happening in Ukraine is that there's a right-wing extremist government that's full of neo-Nazis. They just had a parade for Stepan Bandera. They're tearing down World War II memorials. They're killing people with drones. They have Turkish-made drones they're killing people with. The people in the eastern regions, want their autonomy. There's an agreement called the Minsk Agreement that was signed, which the Kiev government has not fulfilled. And there is a big effort now. They're trying to provoke Russia to invade Ukraine. And Russia's not going to do it. Russia's smart enough to not do it. But the United States is trying to create a situation where Russia will feel like it has to intervene in Ukraine. And then they'll be able to say, see, Russian aggression. It's unbelievable. And they just won't let this go. Russia's not going to invade Ukraine. Russia's smarter than that. But the United States is trying to provoke some kind of conflict in Ukraine. And it's unfortunate. The USA overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014. Ever since then, the country has been divided. And I think what's happening is that the government in Kiev wants to go all in and just viciously attack the people in the eastern regions. They want to just, go after the people in Donbass. And they know that the only way that they'll be able to go in and just viciously murder the people in eastern Ukraine is if they can somehow say Russia did it, or they can somehow say it's a Russian aggression situation, right? If the government in Kiev were to just go and mercilessly attack and slaughter the people of Donbass, then the world would be like, that's pretty vicious, right? But if they can somehow make it about driving Russia out of East Ukraine or something like that, they might be able to get away with it. And I think that's what's really going on. The far right, they call them ultra-nationalists, the people that admire Stepan Bandera, burn down World War II memorials, etc. Those people, they are trying to, they would like to go in and just, crush the Donbass People's Republics. And the only way they can get away with that is if they somehow blame it on Russia. So I think that's what's going on there. All right. The Atlantic Council. Well, the Atlantic Council is a think tank, and yes, it does meddle in U.S. politics. It guides Facebook about what they should ban and what things they should take down. It has a lot of influence in the United States. And yeah, there's all this talk about Russian meddling and stuff. What about Atlantic Council meddling? This is a foreign think tank that is directing control over social media, that has a huge amount of influence on politicians and such. It's this think tank tied to NATO that has a lot of power in U.S. politics. Is very problematic. You know, so there you go. Libertarians, foes or allies. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. I mean, libertarianism ideologically and in terms of economics is absolutely wrong. It is absolutely wrong. Um, that said, I will say one thing about libertarians, which is that some libertarians understand the divisions in the ruling class with a lot more depth than Marxists do. A lot of Marxists, their analysis is very much, it's just all the capitalists are bad, the workers are good, but they don't understand the intricacies of the Eastern establishment. And, Carol Quigley and his book, the Anglo-American Establishment, Carl Oglesby and his book, The Yankee and Cowboy War. There are big divisions in the ruling class, and that's not discussed. And libertarians tend to understand that a little bit more because they're in that, right? They are thinking like capitalists competing with other capitalists. So I'll give them credit for that. And the non-interventionism. I mean, they're isolationists on some level, right? I mean, some of them think that wars are welfare programs. I mean, I'm serious. Some of them think that like we invade countries because we're trying to help those people. Why are we always giving handouts to people in Iraq? That's why we invaded them. Why are we invading and rescuing Iraqis when we should be rescuing Americans? I mean, it's just this. But libertarianism, fundamentally, economically, it's toxic, right? And we need to refute the economic concepts. It's bullshit economics. That said, there are things you can learn from libertarians. There are some libertarian scholars who have a little bit of depth, and you can learn from them. So I don't completely discount it, but economically speaking, it's toxic, and ideologically, it's not good. So yeah, and the libertarian threat. I raised the alarm long before January 6th. Back in 2008, 2009, I was trying to get the communists to understand how dangerous the anti-establishment right was, and no one listened to me. So there you go. All right. QAnon versus Russiagate. Well, Russiagate has been debunked so many times. There was no vast Russian conspiracy to elect Donald Trump. QAnon is this internet conspiracy theory that's about, a secret pedophile conspiracy controls the world. And yeah, liberals hold on to Russiagate, and, many conservatives are taken in by QAnon. Russiagate is this vague, ill-defined, like, Russophobia that is on MSNBC circles. QAnon, it's not as vague. Yeah, QAnon adherents have some very specific beliefs, so it's a little bit different. Yeah, there's some overlap there. And it's the idea is the problem isn't capitalism. The problem is that we just need to purge some group, right? The problem isn't capitalism. It's not why we got Trump and we got the problems of the Trump administration. No, it's this evil conspiracy from Russia. Well, the problem isn't capitalism. It's just this pedophile conspiracy, right? It's how you build a counter gang, right? You build a counter gang to do the dirty work of one section of the ruling class by telling them, oh, we just got to purge the status quo of this, right? That's what anti-Semitism was. Anti-Semitism said, well, the problem is not capitalism, it's just the Jews, right? And anti-Semitism, they talk about anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools. Well, QAnon and Russiagate are the socialism of fools, right? It can't possibly be capitalism, so it's got to be QAnon, or it's got to be this, or, whatever. The Fall of Yugoslavia. Very good book on that by Michael Parenti. It's called To Kill a Nation. The IMF and, look, a lot of German capitalists made, bundles of money off of the destruction of Yugoslavia, playing ethnic groups against each other, and impoverishing, tearing down a prosperous socialist country and replacing it with a lot of neoliberal free market, ethnic, countries that are, it was a disaster. The destruction of Yugoslavia has not been good. The lies, the destruction, the attack on Serbia that Bill Clinton carried out was based on lies. It was just straight up lies that justified it. So there you go. Norman Finkelstein, very brave man. Very brave man. I've had the honor of meeting him on a couple different occasions. Very brave man. He has he's the child of Holocaust survivors, and yet he has gone out to criticize Israel, to criticize the way the Holocaust is used for political purposes. That's basically the point of his book, The Holocaust Industry, is that his relatives who died in the Holocaust deserve better than that. That their deaths shouldn't be used for political ends. He's an anti-Israel Jew. I mean, and I don't know how anti-Israel he is. I mean, he's a critic of Israel. I believe that he is for a two-state solution. I believe he's also he's in he's I don't think is he for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I don't know if he is, but he is a very outspoken critic of Israel from a leftist perspective, and he actually was a Maoist communist in the 70s. He wrote an essay about being a Maoist communist. He used to work for the Guardian newspaper, which was a communist newspaper, the Guardian, the National Guardian. He was a Maoist communist. He said the day that the Gang of Four were arrested, he cried and didn't leave his bedroom for like a week because he was just so hurt by the defeat of the Gang of Four in China. And he comes out of a leftist background. He's an academic, and he's, because of his his relationship and his family having died in the Holocaust and his parents having survived the Holocaust, he has taken it upon himself to be a very outspoken critic of Israel, that's very commendable, right? It's very, very commendable of him to do that. There's a documentary about him which is amusing. It's called American Radical. And he's very New York. I got to tell you, he has that New York. I'm from New York. It's this kind of working class New York way of talking. But hey, that's respectable. I mean, hey, there you go. And I admire Norman Finkelstein. For what he's done. I think he's taken a lot of risks, and I think he clashed with Alan Dershowitz. Right, Alan Dershowitz is ultimately who got him fired from one of his jobs, and now we know a lot's been revealed about Alan Dershowitz lately and Jeffrey Epstein. So the person who he went after and exposed, I actually posted on YouTube a great video of a debate between Alan Dershowitz and Norman Finkelstein, where Norman Finkelstein just exposes him as a liar. And Alan Dershowitz ruined Norman Finkelstein's career. And now we know that Alan Dershowitz had a buddy named Jeffrey Epstein. And so it looks to me like, if anyone is still admiring Alan Dershowitz, they shouldn't be. So there you go. Pretty wild stuff. All right, folks. I think that's where we'll end it for tonight. I think that's all the super chats. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.